The "Hey guys." Tonight, we begin a journey not across the starlit heavens, but deep beneath the earth we stand on. A journey into the crushing, silent darkness of the subterranean ocean and the life it might hold. Imagine, if you will, sinking slowly through the continental crust, past the roots of mountains you once climbed, past the deepest mines ever dug, descending into a realm of immense, gentle pressure. You wouldn't last long here in reality, of course, your body instantly compressed and cooled. But tonight, you can explore freely, protected by the soft, steady hum of my voice and the calming wash of the ambient mix. We are looking for something extraordinary. Ecosystems sealed away and preserved in time, perhaps since before the Miocene epoch. A vast, hidden reservoir. A silent world untouched by the cataclysms and surface dramas of the last 20 million years. As you drift down, you notice the temperature stabilizing, not scalding hot, but a steady, profound warmth, radiating from the planet's core, a constant, reliable source of energy in a world without sunlight. This deep reservoir, theorized by geophysicists, isn't an empty void. It is water, saturated and highly mineralized, locked within the crystal structure of rock or pooled in immense, pressurized caverns. The volume of water held within the Earth's mantle is an established scientific fact that quietly challenges our old assumptions. Some estimates suggest the mantle transition zone alone could hold the equivalent of 3 times the water in all the surface oceans combined. This fact transforms the Earth from a surface water sphere into a deep, water-rich planet. Tonight, however, we are focusing on the shallower crustal and lithospheric pools, the zones closer to life's reach, the perfect, stable time capsules we seek. The quirky tidbit here is that in the deep, water doesn't behave quite like the familiar liquid you pour from a glass. Under these incredible pressures, water can be a supercritical fluid, dissolving rock and carrying minerals in ways we rarely see on the surface, making it an incredible solvent for nutrients and an excellent medium for life. It is this unusual solvent capacity that creates the potential for life to flourish, to draw energy and structure directly from the surrounding minerals. As you contemplate this, a question surfaces quietly in the mind. If life thrives near hydrothermal vents in the surface oceans, drawing energy from chemicals, could similar, perhaps more ancient biospheres exist completely cut off, fed only by the slow, subterranean currents and chemical reactions of the deep crust? What kind of organisms, what kind of forgotten metabolisms would evolve in an environment where the passage of 20 million years means almost nothing to the steady rock and water around them? The search for this lost biosphere demands a shift in perspective. You must forget the sun, forget the air, forget the green world above. Here, life is sustained by chemistry, by the gentle decay of radioactive elements, and by the slow, inexorable movements of the planet itself. The very architecture of the lithosphere, the rigid outer layer of the Earth, acts as the ultimate preservative, creating a stable thermal and pressure environment where the processes of decomposition slow to a near standstill. This is key. Above, ecosystems rise and fall with ice ages and continental shifts. Below, the changes are measured not in millennia, but in epochs. The surface is a chaotic storm. The deep crust is a calm, enduring repository. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. If you're here with me now, drop a comment below and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Knowing that people all over the world are easing into their evening with these quiet explorations grounds our journey in the present moment. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. As you settle deeper into the theoretical embrace of the lithosphere, the rigid, rocky outer layer of our planet, you begin to appreciate its role not as a barrier, but as the perfect time capsule. Imagine it not as solid stone, but as a vast, incredibly dense sponge, holding water and even preserving the delicate architectures of ancient life. The essential condition for preservation here is stability. On the surface, erosion, weathering, and biological decay rapidly dismantle organic material. But down here, perhaps kilometers beneath the current ocean floor or continental shield, the environment is defined by its deep, unchanging calm. The immense pressure, which might seem destructive, is actually one of the greatest preservatives. It works in conjunction with the stable thermal gradients. You are shielded from the dramatic swings of ice ages and volcanic eruptions that characterize surface history. An established scientific fact here relates to hydrostatic pressure. Every 10 meters you descend into water adds 1 atmosphere of pressure. In the deep lithosphere, this pressure is astronomical, and it works to literally keep structures compressed and stable, preventing the chemical bonds of complex organic molecules from easily breaking down. It essentially slows the march of entropy to a crawl. A quirky or lesser-known tidbit is that the sheer thickness of the crust, which can exceed 70 kilometers beneath major mountain ranges, acts as a natural radiation shield. Surface life is constantly affected by cosmic and environmental radiation, which damages DNA and accelerates decay. Deep below, the massive bulk of the rock filters out these energy sources, providing an environment that is not only chemically stable, but also radiologically quiet. This deep earth quietude suggests that any organisms trapped down here would have an exceptionally slow metabolic rate, almost pausing their life functions, or that any dead organic matter would persist for far longer than our surface records allow us to believe. You begin to visualize a pocket of water sealed off during the Pre-Miocene period, perhaps 25 million years ago, when the global climate and the distribution of land masses were significantly different. A coastal swamp ecosystem, rich in early angiosperms or specialized invertebrates, could have been rapidly buried by sediment,
which was then lithified, turned into rock, and slowly driven downwards by tectonic forces. The water, trapped along with the biological material, becomes intensely pressurized brine. The rock matrix around it seals it perfectly, creating a low oxygen, high pressure, consistently warm environment. This contemplation leads to a quiet, open question, a debate whispered among deep geologists. Does the absence of evidence for pre-Miocene soft-bodied life in surface rock records truly mean it didn't exist? Or does it simply mean that the vast majority of those fragile remains were perfectly preserved, locked away inside the deep, inaccessible lithosphere? If we could breach a sealed pre-Miocene brine pocket, would we find not just mineralized fossils, but remnants of soft tissue or even intact DNA fragments, preserved by pressure and the absence of oxidizing agents? The lithosphere, in this view, is the Earth's great library of lost time, written not on paper, but in stone and pressurized water, waiting for the technology that can read it safely. The more you consider the sheer scale and geological resilience of the deep crust, the more plausible the idea becomes that Earth is far better at keeping secrets than we previously thought.
As your mental journey continues into these subterranean realms, you realize that life, even in the absence of sunlight, still requires an energetic input. This is where the concept of hydrothermal vent analogs becomes so compelling. Think back to the surface oceans, to the black smokers found kilometers beneath the waves. These are established scientific facts of life thriving in extremity. They are powered by the chemical energy released when seawater reacts with hot, newly formed magma near tectonic boundaries. Down here, deep within the crust, you encounter a different, yet equally potent engine. Imagine a vast network of fractures and porous rock, kilometers below where the light can ever reach. Water, perhaps ancient, highly pressurized brine, is slowly circulating. It encounters igneous or metamorphic rock that is undergoing slow, persistent chemical alteration. This interaction, the reaction of water with minerals like basalt, for instance, doesn't need molten rock. It generates hydrogen gas, H2, and methane, CH4, along with various sulfide compounds. These molecules, rich in chemical potential energy, are the fuel for a completely independent chemosynthetic ecosystem. The subtle difference down here, the quirky or lesser-known tidbit, is that these deep systems are likely far more stable and diffused than their dramatic surface counterparts. A black smoker vent is an explosive, temporary feature, spewing superheated water and supporting a dense, temporary biomass. A subterranean analog, however, would be characterized by an incredibly slow, steady seep of these chemical nutrients, maintaining a low density but immensely long-lived ecosystem. Instead of giant tube worms and swarms of crabs,
you might find only microscopic biofilms, or perhaps incredibly slow-growing extremophile organisms that divide once every 1,000 years. This environment essentially ensures that life, once established, is almost impossible to eradicate, simply because its energy source, the rock itself, is so enduring. You begin to search the imagination for the remnants of such a system sealed off pre-Miocene. Perhaps during a period of intense crustal formation, a chamber was sealed, trapping not just the water, but the rock's chemical potential and the organisms feeding on it. They would have continued their slow, steady existence, completely unaware of the ice ages or the evolution of the great apes above them. This leads to the fundamental open question: could these sealed pockets of life, powered by chemistry, preserved by pressure, be evolving radically different metabolic pathways than anything we currently study on the surface? We talk often of life using oxygen, or light, or sulfur. But what other elemental chemistries might sustain a 20-million-year-old lineage, isolated and perfectly adapted to its deep mineral cage? The sheer antiquity of the Pre-Miocene is the central theme here. When you consider the vast stretches of deep time we are traversing, the possibility emerges that these subterranean oceans don't just preserve past life. They might house a lineage that has been completely evolutionarily isolated for geological epochs. They represent a branch on the tree of life that we have never observed, shielded not by a physical barrier like a cave entrance, but by kilometers of solid, indifferent rock. It is a thought that quietens the mind, that the most alien life on Earth may not be on another continent, but a short journey straight down.
As you continue your deep descent, you encounter a geological marker that frames our entire search: the Miocene Divide. The Miocene epoch, spanning from roughly 23 million years ago to 5.3 million years ago, represents a significant turning point in Earth's history. For life on the surface, the end of the Miocene brought major cooling, the rapid expansion of grasslands, and the subsequent evolutionary explosion of grazing animals. Crucially for us, the fossil record changes drastically. The established scientific fact is that the global flora and fauna of the earlier Paleogene period, particularly the diverse, warm climate ecosystems of the Oligocene and Eocene, essentially vanished or were radically transformed by this cooling trend. But what if this is only a surface narrative? What if the changes above ground were irrelevant to those worlds sealed below? The concept of the abyss providing a hidden continuity suggests that an ecosystem trapped in a pressurized chamber during the warm, wet Oligocene would be entirely shielded from the global shift to the Miocene's cooler, drier conditions. You visualize the boundary not as a linear geological layer, but as a chronological seal, a lithified barrier that effectively stops the clock for the life trapped beneath it. The rock becomes a perfect, permanent freezer door. A quirky or lesser-known tidbit about this period involves the Antarctic circumpolar current. Its formation and strengthening in the Oligocene acted as the refrigerator for the planet, isolating Antarctica and driving global cooling. This massive, slow-moving ocean current intensified the very global changes that caused surface life to adapt or perish. Paradoxically, the tectonic events that created this surface cooling current likely involved subduction and plate movement, which are precisely the forces needed to trap and seal deep Earth pockets. The chaos above created the conditions for perfect stillness below. You mentally begin to probe the sealed rock for evidence of pre-Miocene life. Perhaps a pocket of briny water that contains the perfectly preserved chemical residue of an Eocene forest biome. Not just fossilized wood, but the actual non-degraded molecular structures of ancient lignin and cellulose. The surface records of these ecosystems are fragmented and subject to heavy mineralization. The subterranean record, hypothetically, offers molecular-level preservation. The central open question we face in this section is profound. To what extent has our understanding of evolutionary history been distorted by relying solely on the imperfect, damaged, and highly selective fossil record available on the Earth's dynamic surface? If we found a fully preserved 25-million-year-old prosimian or a complete Oligocene fern species in a deep Earth trap, would it merely be a scientific curiosity? Or would it fundamentally rewrite the timeline of when certain traits or even entire lineages were considered extinct? The deep, hidden continuity of the subterranean ocean promises to be a far more complete historical archive than the one we have been reading on the ravaged surface. It suggests that extinction is often just a relocation, an encapsulation by the planet itself. Your downward journey now leads you toward a dramatic and immense geological process, the action of subducting slab secrets. This is where the Earth's surface material is actively being recycled into the mantle. Imagine the edge of an oceanic plate, a vast, cold, dense slab of crust and lithosphere plunging slowly, relentlessly, beneath a lighter continental plate. This is an established scientific fact that defines the Earth's dynamism. But in the context of our subterranean ocean, this process isn't just about rock, it's about water and life. As the oceanic slab descends, it doesn't do so cleanly or dryly. It carries water, both chemically bound within the rock's mineral structure and physically trapped in the pores of the seafloor sediments. Visualize the immense weight of the ocean. Kilometers of water-saturated mud, and perhaps even deep-sea ecosystems being dragged down. The slab acts like a gigantic, slow-moving geological towel, wringing out its moisture under intense pressure as it moves deeper. However, not all the water is expelled immediately. Sometimes, due to the unique geometry of the descending plate, vast pockets of surface water, now highly compressed and heated, can be trapped, sealed, and carried deep into the mantle. A quirky or lesser-known tidbit is that these subducting plates can actually lubricate the deeper Earth. The water released at great depth lowers the melting point of the surrounding mantle rock,
which is what often triggers volcanic activity far inland from the plate boundary. This process of release, however, is not always perfect. Imagine a deep-sea trench that was rapidly filled with sediment rich in organic matter and early Miocene marine life, and then, due to a sudden shift in the angle of subduction, this entire package was jammed into an immense, stable pocket, bypassing the usual thermal processes that would destroy the evidence. You are now searching for these pockets, these secret compartments within the churning machinery of the planet. They are not merely reservoirs of water, they are sealed aquatic environments, potentially containing the perfectly preserved soft-bodied remains of deep ocean organisms, or even the molecular signatures of lost phytoplankton species that bloomed before the global cooling trends of the late Neogene. The open question that hovers quietly in this crushing depth is whether the deepest subduction pockets can hold life and water long enough for it to become truly isolated, not just for millions, but for hundreds of millions of years, perhaps carrying Silurian or Devonian ocean biomes deep into the mantle's stable zones. Could the chemical signature of life be preserved in these descending waters even after the physical bodies have been completely dissolved or compressed? The plate tectonic system, which is usually seen as the great destroyer of ancient evidence, might paradoxically be the greatest preservation mechanism, locking away vast pre-Miocene oceanic archives in the deep, silent architecture of the planet.
Deeper still, past the zones where subducting slabs merely carry compressed surface water, you encounter the quiet possibility of primordial water pockets. This is a concept that extends the timeline of preservation far beyond the Miocene divide, reaching back into the planet's infancy. We know from established scientific fact that the early Earth's atmosphere and oceans were vastly different, lacking the high concentration of free oxygen that defines our current breathable air. Imagine now a volume of water that was sealed off from the surface oceans before the Great Oxidation Event, GOE, which began around 2.4 billion years ago. During this monumental shift, cyanobacteria began to flood the atmosphere and oceans with oxygen, radically transforming life and chemistry on Earth. But if a reservoir of water was encapsulated deep within the crust before this event, it would be an anoxic environment, a realm where iron, sulfur, and other elements exist in reduced states, dramatically different from the chemistry that dominates surface life today. The quirky or lesser-known tidbit here lies in the isotopic signature of this primordial water. Water molecules contain isotopes of hydrogen and oxygen. Water that has cycled extensively through the surface, evaporating and precipitating, tends to have a slightly different isotopic composition than water locked away since the planet's formation. If we could sample these deep pockets, finding water with an unusually light or heavy isotopic signature, a measure of its history, it would be a powerful indicator of its ancient, isolated origin. This water wouldn't just be old, it would be chemically alien to the current ocean. You are searching the imagination for pockets of this water, preserved in the deepest parts of the ancient continental shields, perhaps within the roots of cratons that have remained tectonically stable for billions of years.
These reservoirs, untouched by oxygen for geological ages, could host unique chemistries, metabolic pathways based on ancient pre-GOE life forms that were driven to extinction on the surface by the very rise of oxygen. It's a complete inversion of surface history. The oxygenation of the planet, which was a boon for complex life, became the ultimate deep earth preservative for the life it simultaneously extinguished above. This realization brings us to a compelling open question. If life forms have been surviving in these dark, chemically isolated pockets for billions of years, are they the true ancestors of all life, representing a continuous lineage that predates the current oxygen-dependent surface biosphere? Or do they represent a completely separate, second genesis of life, powered by the Earth's internal energy alone? The potential for discovering a non-oxygen respiring, chemosynthetic biosphere that evolved independently for billions of years, completely divorced from the GOE and the subsequent Phanerozoic eons, makes the subterranean ocean one of the most exciting yet most inaccessible frontiers of astrobiology, right here on Earth.
Our quest for preserved pre-Miocene worlds leads us directly into the mineralogical composition of the Earth's interior, specifically to the opacity of olivine. Olivine, a common magnesium-iron silicate mineral, makes up a significant portion of the upper mantle, and it presents an established scientific fact that dramatically impacts our concept of the subterranean ocean. While we typically think of water as liquid pooling in voids, deep below, water exists in a much more subtle and insidious form: structurally bound water. Imagine the crystal lattice of olivine, a highly stable, complex geometric structure. Under immense pressure and heat, hydroxyl groups, OH, are incorporated into this structure. These hydroxyl groups are essentially water molecules, H2O, that have been split and integrated into the mineral's architecture. Olivine and its high-pressure polymorphs, such as wadsleyite and ringwoodite, minerals found in the mantle transition zone, can collectively hold a staggering amount of water, potentially more than all the surface oceans combined, as you remember from earlier. This water isn't free-flowing, it's locked in solid rock. The quirky or lesser-known tidbit is that this stored water is released only under specific conditions of tectonic stress, primarily during subduction or when the mineral lattice undergoes a phase change due to changes in pressure and temperature. Think of the rock not as a cage, but as an enormous multi-million-year-old sponge that is slowly and selectively squeezed. This slow release of water is what creates the localized, pressurized pockets, the subterranean oceans we are seeking, that are far more stable and shielded than any water circulating near the surface. You are now visualizing a region where an ancient water-rich sediment layer, subducted millions of years ago, was rich in minerals that later transformed into olivine. As that rock mass slowly descends, it begins to expel its structural water, not violently, but in a gradual seep. This seepage collects in highly pressurized fracture networks or sealed lithostatic chambers.
If this water was released, say 20 million years ago, and pooled within a stable, cold part of the deep crust, it could represent a massive volume of highly stable pre-Miocene ocean water, carrying not just the chemical memory of the surface, but perhaps intact trapped microorganisms that were part of the initial subducting payload. This leads to a crucial open question. If the water is structurally bound and released gradually, could the energy of this dehydration process itself, the chemical potential released as hydroxyl bonds break and reform, sustain a slow metabolism biosphere? We usually look for life fueled by hydrothermal or chemical reactions, but what about a life form that evolved to parasitize the slow, steady energy derived from the release of water from rock? The deep architecture of olivine and the water it holds is not just a repository, it's a potential engine for the most ancient, isolated, and slow-moving ecosystems on Earth.
The low water mechanisms now visualized, you begin the delicate search for ancient microbial fossils within these deep rock formations. This is where geology meets paleontology in the most extreme environment. The established scientific fact is that the deep terrestrial subsurface is already known to host a vast living biosphere, the deep subsurface microbial community, which may constitute a significant portion of all life on Earth, surviving in sediments and cracks kilometers down. But we are looking deeper and further back in time for the mineralized remains of life sealed off pre-Miocene. Imagine traversing a rock face that was once the sea floor of the Oligocene, now tilted and compressed hundreds of kilometers inland and several kilometers below the surface. You are searching for the subtle signs of biogenicity, features that definitively prove the existence of past life. These are not grand bones or shells, but microscopic structures, tiny tube-like sheaths, delicate mineralized filaments, or complex laminated structures known as stromatolites that would have been formed by ancient microbial mats. The challenge is immense. These must be distinguished from abiotic crystal formations, mineral structures that naturally mimic life. A quirky or lesser-known tidbit that assists this search is the concept of magnetite chains. Certain types of bacteria, known as magnetotactic bacteria, produce tiny, perfect crystals of magnetite, Fe3O4, within their cells, using them like a compass to navigate magnetic field lines. When the organism dies, these perfectly aligned, organized chains remain, and their structural perfection is nearly impossible to replicate through purely inorganic geological processes. Finding fossilized pre-Miocene magnetite chains in deep crustal pockets would be a powerful, almost undeniable signature of a highly organized, ancient ecosystem trapped in time. As you mentally examine these deep formations, the core open question emerges.
Can we definitively distinguish between a geochemically driven mineral structure and a biologically created microfossil when the rock itself has been subjected to millions of years of heat and pressure? The fossil record above is clear-cut in the case of a dinosaur bone, but down here the evidence is subtle, forcing us to rely on isotopic anomalies and complex structural geometries. If a deep rock layer contains microfossils whose shape and chemical composition are utterly unique, representing a lineage that went extinct on the surface 30 million years ago, would we trust the evidence locked in that silent, pressurized darkness over our entire existing timeline? The potential for rewriting the early chapters of life is contained within these microscopic ancient remains.
Thinking your imaginative descent, you find yourself focusing on the liquid components of this deep repository, specifically the potential for biosignatures in brine. It's an established scientific fact that life leaves behind telltale chemical imprints, molecular fossils, even when the cellular structure itself is destroyed. These saline pockets within the crust, often supersaturated with minerals, are not just water. They are concentrated chemical solutions that can act as both a preservative and a documentation medium. Imagine a highly mineralized brine pocket, perhaps 15 kilometers beneath the stable bedrock of an ancient continental craton. This brine is incredibly old, sealed off perhaps during the Oligocene epoch, when global sea levels were lower and warmer. As the early Miocene environment shifted above, the biological material trapped in this pocket began to degrade. But due to the extreme salinity and pressure, conditions that inhibit most decomposition processes, the degradation was not complete destruction. Instead, the organic compounds were slowly transformed into highly stable, long-chain hydrocarbons and other biomarkers. The quirky or lesser-known tidbit here relates to the role of extremophile halophiles, salt-loving organisms. Many ancient brines contain communities of these life forms, but in the deepest, most isolated pockets, the incredibly high ionic strength of the fluid can prevent any biological activity, effectively flash freezing the chemical state of the organic matter. This creates a perfect scenario. The brine acts as an inorganic pickling solution, preserving the chemical signature of the now extinct pre-Miocene organisms that initially saturated the fluid. You are searching for isotopic anomalies in this brine, specifically ratios of light elements like carbon, C, and sulfur, S, that are consistently skewed toward values preferred by biological metabolic processes. Life preferentially utilizes lighter isotopes, carbon-12 over carbon-13, sulfur-32 over sulfur-34, during photosynthesis or chemosynthesis. If you sample a deep pre-Miocene brine pocket and find a significant depletion of heavier carbon isotopes, that chemical signature whispers the undeniable proof of a long-lost biosphere that once thrived in the now sealed environment.
This brings us to the core open question for this section. If we recover a complex organic molecule, say a specific type of ancient lipid or porphyrin, from a deep brine pocket, and its structure is unknown in any extant or known extinct organism from the surface fossil record, how do we confirm its biological origin and place it onto the tree of life? The silent, pressurized salt solution holds the chemical ghosts of pre-Miocene life, challenging us to develop new criteria for determining life's signature when the physical form is long gone, dissolved into the very fluid that preserved its essence.
The quiet, deep male voice. The tone must be warm, soothing, and trustworthy, similar to a sleep story narrator. The pace should be slow and deliberate, approximately 25% slower than natural rate. Maintain a low, steady pitch and a soft, consistent volume. Slightly extend all natural pauses to encourage deep relaxation. Avoid any sudden energy, excitement, or sharp changes in tone. Your quiet, downward exploration now shifts focus to the immense, slow-motion engine of Earth, the tectonic conveyor belt. This established scientific fact, the continuous, predictable movement of the Earth's lithospheric plates, is usually associated with destruction, collision, and the uplift of mountains. Yet here, deep beneath the surface, you realize its potential for preservation. The tectonic system can, paradoxically, transport and stabilize sealed, ancient habitats. Imagine a coastal plain or a shallow sea that existed near a continental margin 40 million years ago, during the Eocene. As new oceanic crust formed elsewhere, this margin was slowly, inexorably pushed under the continental mass, a process known as underplating or low-angle subduction. The key is the rate and the angle. If the burial is rapid and the subduction angle is shallow, the rock containing the pre-Miocene ecosystem is driven deep not into the hot churning mantle, but into the cooler, more stable roots of the adjacent continent. This immense, slow-moving conveyor belt seals the habitat, removes it from surface erosion, and transports it to a stable, deep resting zone where temperatures remain low enough for preservation. A quirky or lesser-known tidbit is that this process of tectonic sealing often occurs along suture zones, the lines where ancient continents have welded together. These zones are characterized by highly compressed, complex rock formations that can trap vast quantities of water and sediment. A particular ophiolite sequence, remnants of oceanic crust now found on land, can contain pockets of ancient, highly preserved deep-sea life that were uplifted and then driven back down, surviving a complete cycle of tectonic churning. The physical shearing and compression acts like a geological press, forcing the contents into an airtight, high-pressure capsule. You are mentally tracing the path of a block of rock that contains a perfectly sealed, briny pocket from the Oligocene. It has been moved laterally thousands of kilometers over millions of years, escaping the thermal destruction that would have occurred had it sunk straight down into the hotter mantle. The movement has been so slow and gentle,
like a vast subterranean migration, that the internal integrity of the pocket has remained intact. This leads to the essential open question of this section. Can we use seismic tomography, the technique that uses earthquake waves to map the deep earth, to identify these specific zones of low velocity, water-rich or less dense rock that are trapped in the cooler, deeper continental roots? If we could map these tectonic refugia, we would have a literal map of potential pre-Miocene life capsules. The tectonic conveyor belt, often viewed as a chaotic force, reveals itself here as the silent architect of deep time preservation, gently tucking away the secrets of past eras.
As the tectonic conveyor belt carries you further into the Earth's depths, you now contemplate the remarkable protective power of deep Earth pressure shelters. While we often think of pressure as a destructive force that crushes, in this context, the immense pressure is the essential key to preserving soft tissues and complex organic compounds intact across geological timescales. This is an established scientific fact. The physical stress of deep burial works in concert with low temperature and anoxic conditions to maintain molecular integrity. Imagine an environment under tens of thousands of atmospheres of pressure, perhaps 10 kilometers down. Under these conditions, the water within the cells of a trapped organism, whether an ancient microbe or the soft parts of a small pre-Miocene invertebrate, cannot easily transition into a vapor, nor can it readily participate in destructive chemical reactions like hydrolysis or oxidation. The pressure acts to physically stabilize the organic structures, forcing the molecules closer together and inhibiting the thermal motion that leads to degradation. It is a form of isostatic freezing without the need for extreme cold. A quirky or lesser-known tidbit is that this intense pressure also affects the activity of enzymes. Enzymes are the biological catalysts that drive decomposition in dead matter. In the surface world, decay is swift. But in the deep earth pressure shelters, the high pressure can severely inhibit or completely deactivate the conformational changes required for these enzymes to function. Essentially, the pressure puts the biological machinery of decay into a permanent frozen stasis, allowing soft tissues, the very structures that vanish from the surface fossil record within years, to theoretically persist for millions of years. You are mentally exploring a compressed layer of Oligocene shale, sealed by a later Miocene intrusion. Inside, you seek the faint chemical ghosts of complex proteins. If the pressure has indeed preserved the structure of these molecules, you might find amino acid chains that are still linked in their original sequence, betraying the life form's identity. Surface fossils only retain the mineralized hard parts. Here, you are seeking the molecular blueprints of life itself. This focus on preservation leads to a critical open question.
Could this pressure preservation mechanism maintain not just the structure of organic molecules, but the integrity of ancient DNA, allowing us to sequence the genome of a life form that has been extinct on the surface for 30 million years? While heat is the enemy of DNA, the combination of immense pressure, chemical stability, and the absence of water-based decay might create the perfect multi-million-year-long molecular time capsule. The deep pressure shelter becomes a living laboratory of paleogenetics, waiting silently beneath the surface.
Your imagination now drifts back to a specific, dramatic period of Earth's history, the opening of the Atlantic Ocean, and the quest for a Jurassic period callback. The established scientific fact is that roughly 175 million years ago, the supercontinent Pangaea began to rift, a monumental event that saw the eastern coast of North America separate from the northwestern coast of Africa, creating the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province and eventually the vast ocean we know today. This rifting, a violent tearing of the crust, also created massive opportunities for deep time preservation. Imagine the rift basins that formed immediately before the full separation. Deep, fault-bounded valleys that were initially filled with freshwater lakes, then brackish water, and finally restricted arms of the nascent ocean. These basins collected vast amounts of sediment, rich with the remains of early Jurassic coastal life, primitive mammals, transitional reptiles, and the unique flora of the newly fragmented continent. The quirky or lesser-known tidbit here is that in these early rift stages, the water became highly saline and anoxic due to rapid evaporation in the confined spaces. These conditions were perfect for the formation of massive salt deposits, or evaporites. As the rift widened, these ancient basins, containing the perfectly preserved organic material and the highly concentrated brine, were slowly dragged downwards and sealed by thousands of meters of subsequent oceanic sediment and basaltic rock. You are searching for sealed ecosystems trapped precisely when the Atlantic first opened. Coastal life from the early to mid-Jurassic, essentially flash-frozen and pickled in salt millions of years before the Miocene even began. This is a level of preservation far deeper and older than our current focus, yet a logical extension of the tectonic ceiling hypothesis. You visualize the immense submerged root system of these ancient continental breaks. If one of these salt-sealed pockets were breached, what would be revealed? Perhaps the molecular residue of the earliest angiosperms, or the soft tissue structure of an early ichthyosaur encased in salt and brine. This leads to the profound open question: could these Jurassic time capsules contain evidence of life forms that bridged the gap between the Paleozoic and the Mesozoic eras, providing the missing evolutionary steps that surface geology has never been able to find? The deep burial associated with the rifting process, a catastrophic event on the surface, is seen here as the ultimate preservative mechanism, locking away the remnants of a world just beginning its long walk toward the modern era. The quiet depths of the Atlantic's foundation might be guarding the true origins of our planet's current life. As your consciousness rests in these deep, ancient layers, you begin to grasp the concept of cryogenic preservation depth, though not in the way we typically imagine refrigeration. This deep earth freezing is not achieved through low temperatures, but through the absence of oxygen and the extremely slow chemical reaction rates imposed by pressure and stable warmth. This is an established scientific fact. Chemical kinetics, the rate at which reactions occur, is dramatically slowed when the reactants, like oxygen or free-flowing water, are limited or placed under extreme pressure. Imagine a sealed brine pocket, perhaps 2 kilometers beneath the permanently frozen sediments of the Arctic permafrost, a region that has been tectonically stable since before the Miocene. While the temperature here might be a gentle 60 degrees Celsius, which is warm enough to sustain some life, the crucial factor is the near total anoxia, the absence of free oxygen. Oxidation is the primary engine of decay and chemical destruction on the surface. Without it, the vast majority of decomposition processes simply halt, allowing organic molecules to persist. The surrounding rock acts as a perfect oxygen scrubber, consuming any trace amounts that might diffuse into the pocket over millions of years. The quirky or lesser-known tidbit here is that this deep preservation is often referred to by geochemists as geological refrigeration. In the absence of oxygen, the primary mode of destruction for organic molecules shifts to hydrolysis, the breakdown of bonds by water. However, the immense pressure and high mineral saturation of the brine, as you remember from the discussion of biosignatures in brine, actually inhibit hydrolysis. The water is so tightly bound or so full of dissolved salts that it is less chemically reactive. The combined effect of anoxia and chemical inhibition is a kind of geological deep freeze, locking the chemical state of pre-Miocene organisms in perpetual stasis. You are mentally examining a core sample from this depth, seeking the molecular residue of an ancient tertiary period ecosystem. The question is not if the life is there, but how intact its molecular architecture remains. Could this cryogenic preservation depth have maintained the complex chemical structure of lignin from an early rainforest tree, or the specific protein structure of an Oligocene bird feather? This leads to the essential open question. If decay is measured not by temperature, but by the rate of chemical reaction, and that rate is slowed to 0.001% by deep earth conditions, how long can organic matter truly survive? Does the concept of a fossil record become redundant when the original organic material itself is preserved indefinitely? This gentle, stable realm below the surface proves that the greatest enemy of organic preservation is not heat or time, but the breath of the surface world, oxygen and dynamic change. Our imaginative journey has taken us through vast, ancient realms. Yet, it must pause to acknowledge the practical limitation that keeps this subterranean ocean a hypothesis: deep drilling limitations. It is an established scientific fact that humanity's ability to penetrate the Earth's crust is remarkably shallow when compared to the depths we are discussing. The Kola super deep borehole in Russia, for instance, remains the deepest artificial point on Earth, reaching just over 12 kilometers. While an astonishing feat of engineering, it is still only scratching the very surface of the lithosphere, which can extend to 70 kilometers beneath the continents, and well short of the tens of kilometers we hypothesize for the deepest, most stable pre-Miocene preserves. Imagine the technological challenge. You are not just drilling through solid rock. You are contending with immense, compounding pressure, temperatures that rapidly climb, though less so in tectonically stable areas, and the constant threat of corrosive, highly mineralized brines. The quirky or lesser-known tidbit here is that the greatest impediment to deep drilling is often not the hardness of the rock, but the instability of the borehole itself. As the drill penetrates deeper, the enormous in situ stress of the rock, the natural pressure of the surrounding material, can cause the walls of the hole to spontaneously collapse, effectively squeezing the drill bit to a halt. The rock is so intensely pressurized that it flows slightly, acting almost like a highly viscous liquid over timescales relevant to the drilling operation. You mentally observe the limitations, the depths where the Oligocene and Eocene ecosystems were sealed, perhaps 15 to 25 kilometers down, remain completely inaccessible to us. We rely entirely on xenoliths, rocks brought up by volcanoes, which we will explore later, and seismic reflection data to infer the presence of deep water and ancient rock structures. We are effectively looking at a sealed envelope without the ability to open it. This leads us to the crucial open question of how we move from inference to verification. What radical new technologies are needed to sample a pre-Miocene brine pocket 20 kilometers down? Does it require plasma drilling, where rock is vaporized by immense heat? Or the development of new alloys and drilling fluids that can withstand the corrosive, high-pressure environments? Until we overcome these profound drilling limitations, the subterranean ocean and its ancient life remain a theoretical time capsule, silent and utterly protected by the immense bulk of the planet itself. The greatest discoveries may be waiting just a few kilometers beyond our current technological reach, forcing us to listen patiently for the faint geological whispers of the deep. Though deep drilling is limited, we rely on established geological processes to infer life's existence, chief among them the serpentinization engine. This is a well-understood chemical reaction, an established scientific fact that demonstrates how rock itself can create the necessary fuel for life, even far below the photic zone. Serpentinization occurs when water, often deep crustal or mantle water, reacts with iron and magnesium-rich ultramafic rocks, such as peridotite. Imagine the water slowly seeping into the dense, dark rock. The reaction is deceptively simple, but immensely powerful. It consumes water, H2O, and rock, and in the process generates significant quantities of hydrogen gas, H2, and methane, CH4, while transforming the original rock into a serpentine mineral. The crucial aspect is that this reaction is exothermic. It releases heat, and it generates the very chemical compounds that form the base of a completely chemosynthetic food chain. The quirky or lesser-known tidbit here is that this process creates an environment often referred to as an abiotic factory of life. It does not require any biological input. The rock and water do the work. The methane and hydrogen produced are highly reduced and energy-rich, perfect for consumption by chemolithoautotrophs, organisms that eat rock and chemicals. In the context of our pre-Miocene preserves, if a water pocket was sealed off 25 million years ago near a body of peridotite, the serpentinization engine could have been running continuously, slowly fueling an isolated, deep earth oasis for millions of years, completely independent of the surface world. You are mentally visualizing the deep, slow-burning fire of this chemical engine. The life here would be incredibly hardy, perhaps possessing the slowest metabolic rate on the planet, thriving on a gentle, perpetual seep of hydrogen. This realization leads to a profound open question. Could the serpentinization processes that sealed and fueled pre-Miocene life pockets be responsible for generating hydrocarbons that later migrated and formed the enormous oil and gas reserves we currently exploit? We typically attribute these reserves to decayed surface life. But the persistent, deep earth creation of abiotic methane by serpentinization introduces a quiet alternative hypothesis for at least some of the planet's energy resources, a resource that was a byproduct of sustaining a long-lost deep biosphere. The continuous, quiet hum of the serpentinization engine brings us to perhaps the most speculative yet compelling possibility of all: non-carbon-based life in these deep pre-Miocene preserves. The established scientific fact is that all known life on Earth is carbon-based, relying on carbon's unique ability to form long, complex, stable chains, the backbone of all organic molecules. But this reliance is predicated on the chemistry dominant in the surface oceans and atmosphere. Down here, in the isolated, pressurized, mineral-rich brines, you are contemplating a realm where the chemistry has been dictated purely by geological processes for tens of millions of years. The immense pressure and high concentrations of elements like silicon, sulfur, and iron could theoretically allow for radically different chemistries to evolve. The quirky or lesser-known tidbit is that while silicon is chemically similar to carbon, both are in group 14 of the periodic table, silicon-based chains are far less stable in the presence of water and oxygen at surface temperatures. However, in an anoxic, high-pressure, hydrothermal environment, the stability criteria shift. The immense pressure could force silicon to form complex molecules that are structurally stable, acting as a viable alternative to carbon chains.
You are mentally searching for a deep Earth pocket sealed before the Miocene, perhaps 35 million years ago, where the dominant energy source was the continuous generation of sulfide compounds or silicate hydrolysis. In this environment, a lineage of organisms might have evolved to rely on iron-sulfur clusters for structural support or silicon polymers for energy storage, adapting chemistries so different from surface life that their molecular signature would be completely unrecognizable to our current methods. This leads us to a fundamental, open question that touches on the very definition of life. If a subterranean, pre-Miocene ecosystem were found to be thriving on a silicon or sulfur backbone, relying on non-aqueous solvents or mineral matrices for replication, would we even recognize its biosignatures? Our current methods for detecting ancient life focus almost entirely on carbon isotopes and common organic compounds. If the deep Earth holds a lineage that bypassed the carbon constraint, an alien life form that has quietly evolved for millions of years just a few kilometers beneath our feet, it forces us to question the universality of the chemical principles we assume for life, and re-examine the silent architecture of these pre-Miocene preserves. Turning our focus back toward the surface, yet maintaining our deep time perspective, we contemplate the possibility of lost land bridges and how their submerged roots might harbor sealed-off terrestrial environments. An established scientific fact is that during periods of lower global sea level, such as the numerous glacial maxima that punctuate Earth's history, vast land bridges emerged, allowing species to migrate between continents. The most famous being Beringia, connecting Asia and North America. Imagine these ancient connections, not just as flat strips of land, but as massive, tectonically active zones, the sutures between continental plates. As sea levels rose, these bridges were submerged, but the geological formations beneath them, deep river valleys, freshwater lakes, and even coastal forests, were often rapidly buried under massive amounts of marine sediment. The quirky or lesser-known tidbit here is that the rapid burial by marine sediment creates an effective low permeability seal. The fine, waterlogged mud turns quickly into shale, a rock that is notoriously good at preventing the exchange of fluids and gases, thereby cutting off the buried terrestrial ecosystem from the surface. You are mentally exploring the submerged root structure of a vast hypothetical pre-Miocene land bridge, perhaps one that connected Australia and South America before the full separation of Antarctica. You search for evidence of freshwater sediments, rich in the remains of Oligocene terrestrial flora and fauna. A lake bed, rapidly buried and then subjected to shallow-angle subduction, could become a sealed, high-pressure terrestrial time capsule. The water in the lake, now highly compressed and mineralized, would be preserving the skeletal and molecular remains of unique pre-Miocene life forms, early marsupials, insects, or specialized conifer species that were wiped out on the surface by the changing global climate. This visualization brings forth a crucial open question. Could these sealed terrestrial pockets, trapped in the roots of lost land bridges, contain the genetic or morphological evidence that resolves major biogeographical mysteries? The unexplained presence of related species on currently distant continents. These deep Earth pockets would hold the direct physical evidence of the migrating populations, rather than relying on the fragmented surface fossil record. The submerged foundations of these ancient connections may be preserving not just lost ecosystems, but the missing links in the evolutionary narrative of terrestrial life, protected by the very oceans that swept over them millions ago.
Our imaginative journey reaches a truly astonishing, yet scientifically plausible depth as we consider the mantle transition zone. This is an established scientific fact. Geophysicists using seismic data have theorized the existence of a massive, deep water reservoir located far below the crust, specifically between 410 and 660 kilometers depth, the region that separates the upper and lower mantle. This reservoir isn't a liquid ocean in the conventional sense, but water held structurally within the crystal lattice of high-pressure minerals like ringwoodite and wadsleyite, as we briefly touched on earlier. Imagine the pressure here. It is so immense that it is almost beyond comprehension, forcing minerals to adopt these incredibly dense structures, capable of binding the hydroxyl groups that constitute water. The sheer scale is the quirky or lesser-known tidbit. If this MTZ is saturated, it is calculated to hold an equivalent mass of water that is several times greater than all the surface oceans combined. This deep Earth water fundamentally redefines our concept of a water planet. While the water is chemically bound in rock, the existence of this vast reservoir proves that water can, and does, penetrate to staggering depths, influencing processes like mantle convection and volcanism. You are mentally exploring the thermal boundaries of this zone. While the temperatures are high, well over 1,000 degrees Celsius, the water is not liquid, and the stability of the mineral structures means that the environment is chemically static. However, the movement of the mantle can occasionally cause pressure or temperature changes that lead to the release of small, highly pressurized volumes of fluid, a deep earth seep. While too deep to hold preserved pre-Miocene surface life, this zone is key because it acts as the ultimate water source for the shallower subterranean oceans we have been investigating. The open question that quietly settles in the mind is one of origin. If the Earth has held this enormous quantity of water in the deep mantle for billions of years, could the molecular building blocks of life, simple organic precursors, have originated within the MTZ itself,
created by the intense pressure and unique geochemistry, and then migrated upwards through these released fluid pathways to seed the surface oceans during the planet's infancy. The transition zone, far from being just a mineral boundary, becomes a potential primordial cradle, quietly supplying the essential component for all life. This deep, silent, water-rich layer challenges the assumption that all of Earth's water, and therefore life's starting conditions, must have come from external sources, like comets or meteorites.
Moving our attention slightly upward from the deep mantle transition zone, we focus now on the crustal architecture itself, imagining the potential for deep fissure habitats. These are not vast open seas, but intricate networks of fractures and fault lines that penetrate deep into the crust, acting as the crucial conduits for fluid and nutrient flow, thereby sustaining isolated biospheres. This is an established scientific fact. Deep fault systems are known to circulate highly mineralized, often superheated water for enormous distances. Imagine these fissures as the veins of the planet. They are created by the constant, gentle stresses of the Earth, small earthquakes, isostatic rebound, and thermal contraction. As you mentally trace a deep fault line that cuts through the roots of an ancient mountain belt, you notice that it isn't solid. It's a zone of brecciated rock, microfractures, and interconnected voids. This fracture network allows highly pressurized water released from deeper layers, as you remember from the olivine discussion, to migrate slowly upward. The quirky or lesser-known tidbit here is that these deep fissure environments are often excellent sites for abiotic methane generation through low-temperature processes far from the serpentinization engine. The friction created by the movement of rock along the fault can itself trigger chemical reactions that break down water and minerals, generating simple hydrocarbon gases. This gas then rises through the fissure network, providing a continuous, gentle supply of energy for the organisms that have colonized the fissure walls. You are mentally visualizing a deep fissure habitat, sealed off during the Oligocene. This is not a sealed pocket of surface life, but an environment where the life evolved in the darkness, fueled entirely by the slow nutrient flow from below. It is a completely self-contained biosphere of darkness. The life here would likely be microbial, forming thin, resilient biofilms on the rock surfaces, perfectly adapted to the constant, gentle flow of water and chemicals. This brings us to the quiet, open question. Could these deep fissure habitats, sustained by purely geological and chemical processes, be truly immortal ecosystems, completely impervious to surface cataclysms like mass extinctions? If the Earth's internal processes continue, then the energy and water supply to these deep fractured habitats is essentially guaranteed. The deep fissure habitat, therefore, represents a stable, continuous lineage that has simply ignored the entirety of the last 30 million years of surface drama, remaining a silent, persistent presence beneath our feet. The deep fissure habitats and primordial water pockets lead us to consider a staggering possibility: Archean relict ecosystems. The Archean eon, which spanned from about 4 billion years ago to 2.5 billion years ago, was a time of intense geological activity, volcanic eruptions, and, crucially, the first known appearances of simple life. The established scientific fact is that the vast majority of rock and ecosystems from this time have been destroyed or radically transformed by plate tectonics and surface weathering. Imagine an ecosystem that formed deep in the Archean crust, powered by hydrothermal vents or serpentinization, and was subsequently sealed off by the immensely thick, stable rock of an early continental craton. As you remember from the lithosphere discussion, these stable shields have resisted major tectonic churning for billions of years. This environment would have life adapted to extreme heat, pressure, and, most importantly, anoxia, surviving before the Great Oxidation Event fundamentally changed the planet. A quirky or lesser-known tidbit is that the very ancient rocks of the Archean are rich in banded iron formations, BIFs, which are mineral deposits formed when dissolved iron in the ancient anoxic oceans reacted with the trace oxygen produced by early life. The deep, sealed environment we are contemplating would represent the pre-BIF chemical state, a realm of entirely dissolved, reduced iron and sulfur. Any life trapped here would be relying on metabolic pathways entirely focused on these elements, a truly primitive metabolism that vanished from the surface billions of years ago. You are mentally searching for life that survived the major shifts of the early Earth periods, not just the Miocene, but the Proterozoic, the Paleozoic, and even the planet's formation. If an Archean relict ecosystem was trapped, perhaps 3 billion years ago, and is still sustained by the in situ generation of hydrogen and methane, as with the serpentinization engine, it would be the ultimate time traveler. Its genetics and chemistry would be completely foreign to everything we classify as life today. The profound open question here is an existential one. If we discovered an Archean relict ecosystem, would it necessitate a complete reevaluation of the universal common ancestor, Luca? If this life evolved entirely separately and was never exposed to the selective pressures of the oxidizing surface world, it might represent a completely independent branch of life, a second genesis that occurred right here on Earth, sealed away in the quiet, chemical darkness of the deep crust. The subterranean ocean in this context becomes the ultimate repository of planetary origins, not just lost epochs. As you continue to search for tangible proof of these deep, sealed environments, your attention turns toward evidence from xenoliths. This is an established scientific fact. Xenoliths, which translates literally from Greek as foreign rocks, are fragments of the Earth's deep crust or mantle that are violently ripped away and carried to the surface within ascending magma, usually through volcanic eruptions. These pieces of deep, solid rock offer us the only natural, unsampled look at the planet's interior. Imagine a xenolith, perhaps a dense peridotite, that was brought up from a depth of 50 kilometers within an ancient volcanic pipe. When geologists analyze these rocks, they often find microscopic, trapped inclusions of fluids and minerals that originated deep below. This is the crucial, quirky, or lesser-known tidbit. These fluid inclusions can be pockets of water, carbon dioxide, or highly mineralized brine that were sealed within the rock's crystal structure as it cooled deep in the crust, or were trapped during the metamorphic processes of deep burial. You are mentally examining a cross-section of a xenolith that originated from a rock layer sealed during the Oligocene. The trapped fluid inclusion within this rock is a microscopic window into a pre-Miocene environment. If this fluid can be safely extracted and analyzed in a laboratory, a highly complex process, it could yield several key pieces of information. Firstly, the isotopic ratios of the water and carbon within the inclusion can confirm its ancient, isolated origin, perhaps demonstrating it was sealed off before major shifts in the global carbon cycle. Secondly, the presence of specific organic molecules, even in trace amounts, that are known to decay rapidly on the surface would be powerful evidence of life preserved by the deep Earth environment. This reliance on geological samples leads to a quiet, open question. How can we definitively determine whether the trace organic molecules found within a xenolith's fluid inclusion represent an ancient, trapped biosphere, a pre-Miocene life form, or simply contaminant material from the deep subsurface microbial community that lives everywhere today? The only way is to find complex, unique organic structures or highly fractionated isotopic ratios that are statistically improbable to have been formed by modern, generalized extremophiles. The xenolith, in its sudden, explosive journey to the surface, acts as an imperfect yet vital snapshot of the silent, ancient world sealed below. Our meditative journey now highlights the microscopic architectural role of clay minerals. This is an established scientific fact. Clay-rich sediments, formed primarily from the weathering of feldspar and other silicate rocks, are exceptional at resisting the movement of fluids. When compacted and subjected to pressure, they become highly effective low permeability barriers. In the context of our deep Earth time capsules, clay-rich sediments are the essential barriers, sealing off and protecting ancient organic material. Imagine a layer of fine, pre-Miocene mudstone, rich in microscopic clay platelets, that was deposited on a warm, shallow seabed or estuary. As this layer was buried by subsequent sediment, the immense weight caused the clay particles to reorient, forming an incredibly dense, overlapping, and interlocking structure.
This process creates what is known as a seal rock in geology, a layer that is virtually impermeable to water and gas. The quirky or lesser-known tidbit is that clay minerals themselves have an intrinsic, subtle negative electrical charge on their surfaces. This charge allows them to physically attract and hold on to positively charged organic molecules, like amino acids and proteins, further enhancing their preservative capability. The clay is not just a physical barrier, it's a molecular fly trap for the fragile remnants of life. You are mentally visualizing the protection offered by this sealed clay layer. An ecosystem trapped beneath it, perhaps a rich community of Oligocene diatoms or soft-bodied marine worms, is cut off from the circulating, oxidizing waters that would otherwise dissolve them. The clay prevents the ingress of oxygen-rich fluids from the surface and also acts to physically cushion the trapped organic matter from the abrasive, shear forces of plate movement, helping to maintain structural integrity. This realization leads to a profound, open question. Could the deepest, thickest clay-rich deposits, sealed since before the Miocene, contain not just fragmented molecular fossils, but entire microbial communities preserved in a state of suspended animation, dormant but potentially viable after millions of years? The combination of anoxia, low chemical activity, and the physical-chemical protection offered by the clay makes these layers the geological equivalent of a vacuum-sealed package. The gentle, persistent presence of clay minerals quietly ensures that the secrets of the Pre-Miocene era remain undisturbed in the subterranean darkness.
We shift our contemplative gaze to the environment that gave rise to these potential preserves, the Pre-Miocene climate. This is an established scientific fact. The global climate before the major cooling trends of the Middle and Late Miocene was significantly warmer, characterized by the Oligocene and Eocene periods, where global average temperatures were higher, and large parts of the polar regions were ice-free. This warmer, often wetter global climate suggests a richer, more diverse surface life that was available to be trapped. Imagine the sheer biological abundance of an Eocene rainforest extending far into higher latitudes that are now temperate or Arctic. The higher temperatures meant a greater rate of biomass production, leading to a much larger volume of organic material, plants, insects, and soft-bodied organisms that could potentially be buried. The quirky or lesser-known tidbit here is that this warmer climate also meant higher sea levels. The absence of major continental ice sheets meant that more water was in the oceans, leading to widespread shallow seas that were perfect environments for rapid sedimentation and the deep burial of coastal and marine life. You are mentally visualizing the density of life in a pre-Miocene warm water lagoon. When the conditions shifted rapidly, perhaps due to a tectonic event or a sudden localized burst of sedimentation, this rich ecosystem was entombed.
The sheer volume of this richer surface life means that the statistical probability of a perfect sealed preserve being formed is much higher than in later, more sparse, glaciated periods. This focus on the pre-Miocene climate leads to a subtle yet crucial open question. Could the genetic diversity preserved within a sealed, warm climate pre-Miocene pocket be far greater than the genetic diversity of any ecosystem that survived the subsequent global cooling? If these pockets hold species that were driven to extinction by the temperature drop, they could represent a massive, untapped genetic library of hyper-diverse, warm-adapted life. The very abundance of the ancient warm climate now works as our greatest ally, quietly suggesting that the richest deep Earth secrets are likely those sealed during the lush times before the planet began its significant global chilling.
As our inquiry moves from direct observation to the frontiers of passive detection, we consider the use of geoneutrino detection. This is an established scientific fact. Neutrinos are subatomic particles, sometimes referred to as ghost particles, that interact with matter only via the weak nuclear force. The Earth's interior naturally produces geoneutrinos as a byproduct of the radioactive decay of elements like uranium-238 and thorium-232, processes that also generate a significant portion of the Earth's internal heat. Imagine gigantic underground detectors, vast tanks filled with liquid scintillator deep in abandoned mines, designed to capture these elusive particles. While these detectors are primarily used to study the decay processes in the mantle, the quirky or lesser-known tidbit is that the movement of deep pressurized water within the crust can subtly affect the pathway or interaction profile of these geoneutrinos, or, more directly, the presence of large bodies of water can alter the background signal by shielding the detector from external sources. Furthermore, the decay of radioactive isotopes within the water itself could potentially be mapped. You are mentally exploring how future, highly advanced neutrino detectors could be used not just to map radioactive decay, but to literally map the location and flow of deep pressurized water, the theoretical subterranean oceans we seek. By measuring subtle anomalies in the flux of geoneutrinos at different locations, scientists could potentially paint a three-dimensional picture of where vast water-rich structures exist far beneath our current drilling capabilities. The key here is not detecting life, but detecting the habitat of life. This leads to the crucial open question: can the next generation of geoneutrino detectors become the first technology capable of verifying the scale and distribution of the theoretical mantle transition reservoir and the shallower crustal pockets we hypothesize hold pre-Miocene life?
If we can confirm the existence and precise location of these huge, stable, deep water bodies through particle physics, the focus of our exploration shifts instantly from if to how we access the ancient life sealed within. Geoneutrino detection offers a quiet, almost spectral way of listening to the immense plumbing of the planet, revealing the silent locations of our subterranean oceans.
We now focus on the life itself, the theoretical organisms within these sealed Pre-Miocene preserves, powered by the continuous geological engine, the chemotrophic oasis. This is an established scientific fact. Life does not require sunlight. Chemosynthesis, the process by which organisms convert one-carbon molecules like carbon dioxide or methane and nutrients into organic matter using the oxidation of inorganic chemical compounds as an energy source, is the foundation of many deep-sea and deep-earth ecosystems. Imagine a sealed brine pocket, perhaps 40 million years old, that has absolutely no connection to the surface and therefore no access to the sun's energy. The life here, whether microbial biofilms or more complex organisms if they exist, survives entirely on the stored chemical potential energy of the rocks around them. As you remember from our discussion on serpentinization, the water reacting with the rock generates hydrogen and methane. These compounds are the ultimate energy currency here. The chemotrophic oasis relies entirely on the planet's internal heat and mineralogy to survive, making it an enduring, self-sustaining system. The quirky or lesser-known tidbit is that the growth rate of organisms in these oases is often incredibly slow. Due to the limited, gentle seep of nutrients and energy, these organisms might have division times measured in centuries or millennia. This extreme longevity and slow pace of life are themselves acts of preservation, minimizing the molecular turnover and maintaining a stable, ancient ecosystem with minimal resource requirements. An individual organism might have been alive for the entire duration of the Miocene epoch, quietly subsisting in the deep. You are mentally visualizing the energy flow within such an oasis. The organisms are utilizing ancient, stored energy, the chemical bonds created when the Earth was violently forged. This leads to the central open question. If these chemotrophic oases are entirely decoupled from the surface, could they have developed bioluminescent properties for internal communication or hunting, despite the permanent darkness? It seems contradictory. Light in the total absence of the sun. But if communication is necessary in a low-density, eternal environment, evolution might find a way, creating silent, softly glowing ecosystems deep within the crust. The chemotrophic oasis is a testament to life's profound persistence, existing in a realm where time, light, and surface events are rendered irrelevant. We now consider the role of supercontinent cycles in creating these pre-Miocene preserves. This is an established scientific fact. Earth's continents periodically assemble into a single colossal landmass, a supercontinent like Pangaea, and then break apart again, a cycle that profoundly shapes global geology and climate. Crucially for our search, the breakup phase, particularly the fragmentation of Pangaea, created vast subduction zones, which maximized deep water trapping. Imagine the immense forces at play during a continental breakup. As the continents pull apart, new oceanic crust forms, and this dense crust eventually begins to plunge back into the mantle beneath the adjacent continental margins. This continuous large-scale process creates the very tectonic conveyor belts we discussed earlier. The quirky or lesser-known tidbit is that the high volume of subduction that occurs during these cycles means a corresponding increase in the amount of water and wet sediment being dragged downwards. The intense heat and pressure can cause widespread metamorphism, a process that drives water out of minerals and into nearby fracture networks and porous rock. You are mentally tracing the pathway of a massive wedge of sediment, rich with the organic detritus of the Triassic and Jurassic periods, that was rapidly buried during Pangaea's breakup. The subsequent creation of vast subduction zones provided the perfect pressure cooker and sealing mechanism, forcing water and organic matter into deep earth pockets. This process ensures that the pre-Miocene material we seek is not just randomly distributed, but concentrated in the deep, stable roots near these ancient suture zones. This focus on the scale of geological history leads to a quiet, open question. Could the global, highly cyclical nature of supercontinental assembly and fragmentation ensure that Earth has consistently maintained a network of deep, sealed biotic refugia throughout all of deep time, preserving samples of life from virtually every era, not just the Pre-Miocene? The supercontinent cycle, often seen as the primary cause of global environmental instability, is also revealed as the greatest geological curator, systematically encapsulating and storing samples of ancient biospheres in the deep subterranean ocean. The following massive scale of the supercontinent cycles, we narrow our focus once more to the molecular level, embarking on the isotopic anomaly search. This is an established scientific fact. When organisms process carbon, sulfur, or nitrogen, they preferentially utilize the lighter isotopes of these elements, leading to a measurable difference, or fractionation, in the remaining materials. This difference, the isotopic anomaly, is one of the most reliable biosignatures available to geochemists, serving as a chemical whisper of past life. Imagine sampling the deep mineralized brine that you remember from earlier, specifically searching for unusual ratios of light elements. For instance, the carbon in organic matter, carbon-12, is consistently lighter than the carbon in inorganic carbonate rock, carbon-13. If you find a sealed Pre-Miocene rock or fluid pocket with a significant and highly negative delta-13C value, meaning it is extremely enriched in carbon-12, it signifies biological activity. The quirky or lesser-known tidbit is that this fractionation effect can be even more pronounced in the extreme environments of the deep Earth. Organisms living on limited, energy-poor resources often have to work harder and are even more selective, leading to unusually large isotopic shifts that are easier to spot, making them a clearer sign of ancient life. You are mentally using a high-resolution mass spectrometer to analyze samples from a deep, ancient marine sediment layer sealed by a Miocene fault. You are looking for a consistent isotopic signature that aligns with life forms long extinct on the surface. This search requires differentiating the faint signal of pre-Miocene life from the isotopic signature of modern deep microbial communities. The stability of the deep environment is key. Since the sealed pocket is isolated, its isotopic signature should be entirely consistent with the chemistry and life that were present when the seal was formed millions of years ago, unaffected by the last 20 million years of surface biological and atmospheric changes. This detailed molecular search brings forth a critical open question. If an isotopic anomaly is found deep within a sealed pre-Miocene pocket, and its degree of fractionation is radically different from any known surface organism, either modern or extinct, does this provide evidence for a novel, ancient metabolic pathway that existed only in the Pre-Miocene and was completely erased from the surface biosphere? The isotopic anomaly search is our quiet, forensic tool, allowing us to read the chemical fingerprints left behind by the silent, ancient residents of the subterranean ocean. We now return to the concept of the deep Earth's energy sources, imagining the presence of black smokers below. This is a conceptual extension of the established scientific fact regarding hydrothermal vents on the ocean floor, the black smokers, where superheated, mineral-rich water jets out from the crust. Down in the subterranean ocean, we are imagining deep crust versions of these vents supporting sealed ocean life. Imagine not the wide-open expanse of the abyssal plain, but a confined, pressurized chamber within the lower continental crust. Within this chamber, highly pressurized water is circulating near a zone of intense heat, perhaps a deep, slow-cooling igneous intrusion. This water is heating rapidly and dissolving massive amounts of minerals from the surrounding rock.
Unlike the surface black smokers, which rely on seawater cycling, these deep crust vents are completely closed-loop systems, recycling the ancient, sealed-off Pre-Miocene brine. The quirky, or lesser-known tidbit is that these subterranean smokers would likely operate under supercritical conditions. At a certain depth and temperature, water stops behaving as a distinct liquid or gas and becomes a supercritical fluid, a dense, highly reactive solvent. This supercritical fluid can strip minerals from the rock far more efficiently than normal water, creating an even richer chemical soup. This constant, high-pressure infusion of super-reactive chemicals would fuel a sealed ocean life far more robustly than the gentle seep of a typical chemotrophic oasis. You are mentally observing a plume of superheated, dark, mineral-rich fluid rising from a deep fissure into a sealed Pre-Miocene pocket. This plume represents an energy concentration point, allowing life to cluster around it. The organisms here would be extremophiles, adapted to hypersalinity, intense pressure, and highly concentrated sulfides. This visualization leads to a compelling open question. Could these high-energy, deep-crust smokers, sealed off from surface evolution for millions of years, host highly organized, complex life forms that require a greater energy density than simple microbes? While we typically assume that deep Earth life must be slow and sparse, the concentration of energy at a deep crust vent might allow for more complex structures, or even multicellular organization, to evolve within the stable confines of the subterranean ocean, offering a hidden parallel track of evolution. The black smokers below are the planet's internal furnaces, stoking the fires of potential ancient, deep-seated life.
As our journey nears its theoretical conclusion, we focus on the potential preservation of entire, complex marine structures. Imagining extinct reef biomes sealed within the accreted margins of continents. This is an established scientific fact. Coral reefs and other biogenic structures are incredibly efficient at building up massive carbonate platforms, which, due to their distinct density and composition, often resist the standard destruction of tectonic subduction. Imagine a vast, flourishing Oligocene reef, a Pre-Miocene structure built by now extinct species of coral, sponges, and mollusks. As tectonic plates collided or crustal segments were thrust over one another, this carbonate platform, with its highly porous structure, was rapidly buried by fine, dense sediments, the same clay-rich layers you remember from earlier, acting as a perfect seal. Instead of the rock dissolving or being squeezed into oblivion, the entire reef structure was sealed and pushed deep into the accreted margin of the continent. The porosity of the reef, the myriad of tiny chambers and skeletal structures, remains, now filled with highly pressurized ancient brine.
The quirky or lesser-known tidbit here is that the rapid burial often creates a unique, low-oxygen, high-alkalinity environment within the porous rock. This chemical environment is ideal for mineral replacement, where the original skeletal structure of the coral is slowly replaced by more stable minerals, creating a perfect, three-dimensional, high-resolution fossil of the entire biome. The rock becomes a faithful, permanent mold of the extinct ecosystem. You are mentally exploring a sealed, deep earth chamber that holds a vast, perfectly preserved, fossilized Oligocene reef. It is not just a few scattered fossils, but an entire, intact architectural structure. The brine within the ancient pores could still hold the molecular residue of the soft-bodied organisms that lived among the coral, the long-extinct fish, cephalopods, and algae. This breathtaking visualization leads to a profound, open question. If we could access and study a sealed Pre-Miocene reef biome, would it confirm that the Great Oligocene extinction event, which severely pruned the diversity of marine life, was merely a surface phenomenon, and that the true biodiversity of that era remains preserved, locked away in these subterranean carbonate vaults? These fossilized reef biomes represent the ultimate architectural time capsule, quietly awaiting the technology that can reveal the complexity of a lost oceanic world.
Our quiet, immense journey through the theoretical architecture of the deep earth culminates by looking forward to the future deep probes that will transition this hypothesis into established fact. We recognize the current deep drilling limitations, as you remember from section 14, but we must imagine the technological possibilities for autonomously exploring and sampling the deep subterranean oceans. This is the final step in unlocking the secrets of the Pre-Miocene preserves. The established scientific fact that drives this future is the convergence of miniaturization, autonomy, and extreme engineering. Current technology is already developing robust, high-pressure submersibles for oceanic trenches. The future requires extending these concepts into the solid Earth. Imagine a geological cryobot, a probe equipped with a small, high-powered thermal drill capable of melting its way through solid rock using extreme localized heat, perhaps plasma or highly focused sonic energy. This cryobot would be entirely autonomous, sensing changes in rock density and temperature to steer toward areas of lower seismic velocity, which indicate the presence of water-rich material. A quirky or lesser-known tidbit is the concept of telesampling via pressure differential. Instead of relying on traditional drilling, the future probe could locate a pressurized brine pocket, use a minimal thermal burst to create a small aperture, and allow the extreme internal pressure of the sealed pocket to self-sample,
forcing the ancient pressurized fluid up a narrow, engineered conduit and into a protected internal reservoir for analysis. This minimizes contamination and relies on the very force that kept the pocket sealed for millions of years. You are mentally observing this future probe, perhaps 20 kilometers down, autonomously navigating a network of deep fractures. It is searching not just for water, but for isotopic anomalies and molecular biosignatures within the trapped fluid. It would utilize on-board miniaturized mass spectrometers to analyze the carbon ratios and look for complex organic molecules in real time, instantly validating the antiquity and biological origin of the sealed pocket before the pressure release could cause chemical changes. This leads to our final, compelling open question. When future deep probes finally breach a sealed pre-Miocene preserve, will the life they find be extinct and merely chemically preserved? Or will the discovery be of living, viable organisms, slow metabolism, deep earth microbes that have been continuously alive, evolving in isolation since before the rise of our current human lineage? The technological leap required is immense, but the prize, the undeniable living or perfectly preserved physical record of life from a lost geological epoch, makes the subterranean ocean the single most profound target for Earth science in the coming centuries. The quiet, endless pressure of the deep holds the history of our planet, waiting for the technology that can finally hear its secrets. The quiet of the deep, a profound silence that has persisted for tens of millions of years, now settles over you. As we gently ease away from the immense pressures and the ancient mineralized brine pockets, feel the slow, steady hum of the earth beneath you, a subtle vibration that is the only marker of deep time. You are floating upwards, past the roots of cratons, past the remnants of sealed pre-Miocene reefs, leaving the realm where the world's history is preserved not in surface strata, but in the perfect, stable architecture of the lithosphere. The journey we took tonight, through the concept of tectonic preservation, the chemical logic of serpentinization, and the theoretical presence of life decoupled entirely from the sun, was an invitation to redefine what we believe is possible. The subterranean ocean remains hypothetical, but its existence is supported by the quiet mathematics of geological science, offering a silent, enduring continuity against the chaotic backdrop of surface evolution. Let the knowledge that there are still profound, undiscovered worlds beneath your feet bring a sense of grounding and perspective. Allow the vastness of the eons we traversed to soften the edges of your present thoughts. The immense pressure that guarded those ancient ecosystems now translates into a feeling of deep, quiet stability around you. You are safe. You are drifting in the knowledge that the deepest secrets of our planet are patiently kept, and that the greatest mysteries often lie in the most quiet, unobservable places. Allow the gentle pulse of the ambient sound to slow your breath and ease your mind toward rest.